The courthouse lobby was built for permanence, not comfort. Marble slabs stretched from wall to wall, polished to a sheen that reflected the light in sharp, sterile angles. The ceilings rose high, echoing with the hollow rhythm of footsteps, each step amplified until it no longer belonged to a single body but to the institution itself. Glass panes framed the entrance, transparent yet unyielding, dividing those who were allowed in from those who were kept out. At the center stood the metal detector archway, humming faintly, a modern altar to authority. Every person passed through it with the same mechanical submission. Keys in the tray, phone in the bin, belt sometimes loosened, wrists spread. The ritual repeated endlessly, a choreography of small humiliations disguised as procedure. The officer commanded this space as though it were his own. He stood near the archway, posture sharpened into rigidity, eyes scanning faces not for security but for judgment. His uniform was immaculate, creases pressed into the fabric, the badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. He had learned how to let silence do his work, how to let a pause stretch into pressure, how to remind each person they entered not as equals but as subjects. The black man approached quietly, his pace steady, deliberate. His suit was dark and plain, pressed with care. He carried no briefcase, no visible markers of profession, only a small leather wallet in his hand. His shoes struck the marble floor with a muted squeak, once, then again, a sound that carried far in the cavernous lobby. He stopped at the table, removed his watch, his keys, placed them into the tray. The officer watched him without speaking, his gaze following the man's hands with a stiffness that suggested suspicion more than protocol. "Step through," the officer said finally. His voice clipped, neutral in tone but edged with something colder. The man complied. He walked through the archway, his back straight, his head still. The machine did not sound. Yet the officer raised a hand, back again. The words fell with a bluntness that made the silence that followed heavier. Others waiting in line shifted slightly, though no one spoke. The man turned, walked through the archway again, no sound. Still, the officer motioned for him to stop. Arms out. The officer ran the handheld scanner across his body, moving slowly, as though searching for something invisible. The device remained silent. It was not efficiency, but ritual, stretched long enough to mark difference, long enough to remind. The man's shoes squeaked faintly as he adjusted his stance, the sound echoing again in the marble chamber. Another repetition, another wait. The officer circled him, the scanner close to the man's suit jacket, pausing near the chest pocket, lingering. Nothing. He pulled back, but not before locking eyes briefly. The officer's expression flat, the man's unreadable. Finally, the officer stepped aside. "Go ahead." The man retrieved his belongings from the tray, sliding the watch back onto his wrist, slipping the wallet into his pocket. As he did, the edge of an ID badge glinted briefly in the fluorescent light, though he tucked it away before the officer could see it clearly. The lobby swallowed him again as he walked further in, his shoes continuing their measured rhythm against the marble floor. Each step seemed to dissolve into the architecture, absorbed into the system itself, until the individual was indistinguishable from the ritual. Behind him, the officer resumed his stance by the archway, waiting for the next body to pass, the next chance to remind someone that entry came only at the cost of submission. The lobby held the silence, cold, deliberate, heavy. The hallway outside the courtroom was narrow, lined with benches that had absorbed years of waiting. The wood was hard, lacquered in a dull finish, polished smooth not by care but by the weight of countless bodies pressed against it. The bench offered no comfort. Its purpose was not to ease but to contain, to remind those who sat upon it that time here was not theirs. The black man sat in the middle, his hands folded neatly in his lap, posture upright. His suit remained pressed, his expression still. Only his eyes moved, scanning the hallway, the sealed courtroom doors, the bulletin board with faded notices, the fluorescent light above that hummed faintly like a low, constant reminder of presence. The officer patrolled nearby. His boots struck the tile floor in a steady rhythm, slower than necessary, measured to announce his authority. His shoulders were squared, his chest slightly forward, his hand hovering near his belt. Each pass he made down the hall carried his gaze back to the man on the bench. It was not curiosity but scrutiny, a silent insistence that the man's existence here was conditional, provisional. Every so often, The officer broke the silence with words barked at others. Move back. Keep the line clear. Phones away. Each order was short, sharp, stripped of courtesy. They echoed against the tile and wood, reverberating longer than they lasted. Between those bursts, the silence returned, thick, unrelenting. The man adjusted his cufflink slowly, a controlled movement, deliberate in its quietness. His shoes, resting firmly on the ground, did not move. The bench beneath him did not creak. Stillness became his shield, the refusal to flinch a form of resistance. The officer stopped once, standing too close. His shadow fell across the man's knees, long under the artificial light. He looked down at him, a faint curl at the edge of his mouth. Not a smile, but something colder. You comfortable? The officer asked. The words were casual on their surface, but the tone carried barbs. The man raised his eyes, meeting the officer's stare without expression. He did not answer. The silence extended. The officer waited for a response that never came. After a moment, he shifted, gave a short exhale, and resumed his patrol. The sound of his boots began again, filling the hallway with their deliberate rhythm. Minutes stretched. The man sat still as stone. Others came and went. Attorneys with briefcases, clerks with files, all passing quickly, heads down, as though the bench and its occupant were part of the building itself, part of its furniture. None stopped. None spoke. Another pass, another glance. The officer's gaze lingered again, this time flicking briefly to the man's shoes polished to a shine, his own boots scuffed with wear. A small detail, but enough to stoke irritation. He slowed as he walked past, close enough for the brush of air between them to carry meaning. The man remained motionless. The bench held him, unyielding. Its surface pressed into his back, its hardness against his spine, a constant reminder of where he was. Not in comfort, not in equality, but in waiting. And yet, the weight of it did not bend him. The officer continued his patrol, each circuit an attempt to impose presence, each glance a reminder of scrutiny. Still the man endured, his silence becoming heavier than words, his stillness louder than any protest. The hallway, with its wooden benches, humming lights, and echoing steps, became a theater of posture and patience. Authority walked in circles. Dignity sat unmoving. The silence stretched on, oppressive, deliberate, and the bench bore witness. The courtroom was colder than the hallway, not in temperature but in atmosphere, a space stripped of warmth arranged for control. The benches here were narrower, the wood harder. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing the room in a pale glow that erased shadows and flattened faces. No softness remained. At the front, the judge's bench towered above the rest, carved in dark wood, a block of permanence. The gavel rested upon it, small, almost fragile in appearance, yet carrying the authority to decide fates. When struck, it would not sound like wood meeting wood. It would sound like a system stamping itself onto flesh, onto futures. The black man entered quietly, his shoes striking the floor once more, the sound swallowed quickly by the room's thick silence. He took his place at a side bench, not at the center of attention, but present, steady. His posture remained straight, hands folded as before, his face composed. The officer was already inside. He stood at the back of the room near the door, his uniform firm against his frame, his eyes trained on the man. He watched him not as one might watch a peer, but as one observes a potential problem. His gaze was heavy, continuous. He assumed without question that this man belonged lower, a defendant, a witness, someone called to answer, never to command. The proceedings began. The judge entered. The clerk called the docket. Names echoed across the chamber like items on an assembly line. Attorneys spoke in measured tones, reciting statutes, filing motions. Each word carried weight for those involved, yet the rhythm was bureaucratic, indifferent. The system moved forward as though on rails, its momentum greater than the individuals within it. The man listened, silent, unflinching. His presence did not disturb, nor did it yield. He was there as if carved into the space, neither participating nor submitting. From his place at the back, the officer's eyes never drifted. Every small movement of the man, the adjustment of his cuff, the shift of his shoulders, was tracked. It was not duty but fixation. He saw not composure but defiance, not dignity but arrogance. During a recess, the room emptied slightly. Attorneys shuffled papers, a clerk whispered to the judge. The officer seized the moment. He moved toward the man, steps deliberate, body angled forward. "You need to stay seated until called," he said, though the man had not moved. The words landed not as instruction but as assertion. The man looked up, his face unreadable, his posture unchanged. He did not answer. The officer stepped closer, too close, his presence filling the space. He loomed above, waiting for a reaction. His hand hovered near his belt, not on his weapon but close enough to suggest it. The silence in the room thickened. Those nearby, a clerk gathering papers, an attorney flipping through a file, froze briefly, then lowered their eyes. No one spoke. No one intervened. Their silence became part of the structure itself, complicity built into the architecture. The man's eyes met the officer's, steady, calm. He remained seated. His silence was deliberate, cutting deeper than any word. It was not submission. It was endurance. The officer lingered, his chest rising with slow, controlled breaths. He wanted resistance. He wanted motion. None came. The man's stillness denied him that satisfaction. Finally, the officer stepped back, muttering under his breath, a sound swallowed quickly by the room. He returned to his post, his boots striking the floor with harder force than before. The fluorescent lights continued their hum, exposing everything, softening nothing. The gavel still rested on the bench, waiting to be raised, waiting to strike. The room breathed its cold authority. The silence held it in place, and endurance remained seated. The hallway stretched long and narrow, its marble floor gleaming under fluorescent light. The recess had ended, but the courtroom doors had not yet reopened. Lawyers stood in clusters, murmuring. A clerk adjusted a stack of papers against her chest. The black man sat once more upon the hard bench, his posture unchanged, his face composed. The officer stood nearby, his eyes fixed on him. The earlier silence between them had fermented into something heavier, something volatile. Each second that passed was another drop added to the vessel of his irritation, filling, pressing against the edge. The officer moved. His boot struck the marble in hard bursts. He closed the distance with a pace too sharp for protocol, too personal for duty. "On your feet," he barked. The man did not move. He sat with the same upright stillness, his hands folded in his lap. His silence was not defiance shouted, but endurance made visible. The officer's jaw tightened. His hand shot out, fingers closing around the man's arm with sudden force. The grip was rough, pressing into fabric, digging into flesh. He yanked upward, expecting resistance, expecting struggle. The man rose because the officer dragged him up, not because he chose to. His body lifted under the violence of another's hand, but his face remained calm, his gaze steady. The officer shoved him against the wall. Marble met shoulder with a dull thud, the sound sharp in the hush of the hallway. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Feet paused. "Hands where I can see them," the officer demanded, though the man's hands were already open at his sides. No resistance, no fight, only the officer's hand pressing, controlling, declaring dominance. He pushed harder, forearm against chest now, body weight leaning in. The marble was cold against the man's back, unyielding. The officer's breath grew heavier, a rhythm of exertion and rage. Onlookers hesitated. The clerk clutched her papers tighter. An attorney opened his mouth, then closed it. A deputy further down the hall shifted but did not step forward. Silence encased them all, a silence not of ignorance but of complicity. The officer's hand rose. A strike. The sound of palm against fabric, fabric against flesh. Quick, sharp, again. The man did not raise his own hand. He absorbed the violence not with weakness but with a stillness that made the brutality more naked, more obscene. Each blow landed into silence, amplified by the lack of resistance. The fluorescent lights glared down, sterile, exposing every detail, the sweat forming at the officer's temple, the glint of his badge as he leaned in, the unwavering calm in the man's eyes. The officer's strikes slowed, not because of intervention, and none came, but because of his own breath. Rage gave way to exertion, exertion to fatigue. His hand lingered one last time on the man's chest, trembling slightly before he pulled back. The hallway was still. The onlookers pretended to rearrange papers, to check their phones, to look elsewhere. Their silence remained unbroken, a wall thicker than any marble. The man adjusted his jacket with slow precision, smoothing the fabric where it had been wrinkled. His eyes stayed steady, fixed not on the officer but straight ahead, as though looking through him. The officer stood back, chest rising, jaw clenched. his authority still intact in form but shaken in substance. His hand, the instrument of violence, now hung heavy at his side. The hallway absorbed the moment. No word spoken. No justice offered. Only silence. The assault ended not with resolution but with exhaustion, and the silence deepened. The incident did not end in the hallway. It trailed into offices, into whispers, into paperwork. The courthouse absorbed it the way old walls absorb smoke, not erasing it but dulling its edges, tucking it into corners where it might be ignored. The black man had not raised his voice. He had not demanded. He had walked slowly toward the administrative wing when the courtroom reconvened. His jacket still bore the crease of where the officer's forearm had pressed against his chest. He did not adjust it again. He let it remain visible, an imprint of the moment. The officer followed, summoned more by habit than by choice, his boots striking the tile with forced confidence. His face carried the remnants of exertion, the faint flush of adrenaline. He expected reprimand at most, a mild word, perhaps a report buried. The institution had always made space for his kind of force. The administrative office was smaller than the courtroom, but colder. No benches here, no wood polished by years of waiting. Only a desk, steel file cabinets, fluorescent light pressing down from a low ceiling. Papers stacked neatly, a computer screen glowing faintly, the hum of the HVAC system filling the silence. The clerk at the desk looked from one man to the other, then to the papers in her hand. She adjusted her glasses, her voice quiet. Name? The black man reached into his pocket. From the leather wallet he slid the card free, not hurried, not with show, but with the same precision that had marked all his movements. The ID badge caught the fluorescent light, the laminated surface glinting. The officer saw it. His eyes narrowed, then blinked. His body shifted slightly, weight redistributing without his permission. The clerk's gaze moved to the badge. She read aloud, her voice flat, bureaucratic. Commander. District Division. The word settled in the room with more weight than its syllables carried. Commander. It rang against the steel cabinets, against the sterile desk, against the silence. The officer froze. His posture, once rigid, faltered. His chin lowered slightly, shoulders tightening inward. His badge glinted under the same light, but its shine now appeared dull, diminished. The black man did not speak. He did not need to. The silence between them was no longer submission. It was judgment. The officer's mouth parted slightly, a breath caught in his throat, but no words formed. He stared at the badge, at the name printed there, at the authority that was not new but had been hidden from his presumption. The humiliation came not in shouts, not in rebuke, but in stillness. The man slipped the badge back into his wallet, the motion calm, deliberate. He placed the wallet into his pocket and buttoned his jacket. His eyes rose, meeting the officer's directly. No anger, no triumph, only clarity. The silence stretched heavier than before. The clerk, sensing what had unfolded, lowered her gaze back to her papers. She did not speak again. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the room, sharp and relentless. The officer remained standing, his boots rooted to the floor. His authority had not been stripped by force but inverted, revealed for what it was. Fragile, dependent on ignorance. The man turned, stepping toward the door. His shoes struck the tile, one step then another, the sound echoing in the small office, steady, unbroken. The officer's breath followed him, shallow, uneven. His posture had collapsed inward, no longer rigid but reduced. The door closed softly behind the man, leaving the officer in silence. A silence that was no longer his weapon. The office was quiet, insulated from the noise of the courthouse. The desk was broad and dark, its surface bare except for a single folder and a glass of water. Behind it, the chair stood firm, high-backed, its presence commanding even in stillness. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, washing the room in the same sterile glow as the hallway, the lobby, the courtroom. Authority wore a different face here, but the light remained the same. The black man sat in the chair now, his posture as steady as it had been on the bench, as unbending as it had been against the marble wall. His jacket was buttoned, his shoes polished, his silence intact. Before him, the badge rested on the desk, its surface catching the light glinting faintly with each small movement of the air. Beyond the office door, the officer stood in the corridor, waiting. His boots no longer struck with rhythm, They were still planted. The weight of his body shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. He was no longer the enforcer of silence. He was caught within it. Disciplinary forms had been drafted, witness statements collected. The assault was no longer a rumor, but a matter of record. Yet the man behind the desk knew how records were handled. Words written on paper could be filed away, diluted, rewritten in the language of procedure until their sting faded. The system was not made for revelation. It was made for absorption. He leaned back slightly, eyes moving across the office. The walls were pale, undecorated, functional. The air smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. Nothing here was personal. Everything here belonged to the institution. Even the chair in which he sat carried a weight not of comfort but of continuity. Command was not ownership. Command was stewardship of a structure that resisted change. His thoughts returned to the lobby, to the marble floor that reflected every footstep, to the bench that pressed into his spine, hard and unyielding, to the gavel that had not struck but hung waiting, dormant yet ready. The building itself had not shifted. Its silence had not broken. Its rituals continued, a knock at the door. Soft, tentative. The officer waited outside. "Enter," the man said. The door opened. The officer stepped in, shoulders squared by habit but chin lowered by circumstance. His eyes flicked once toward the desk, then down to the floor. His badge caught the light, glinting briefly before his movement dulled it again. The silence between them was total. The man did not rise. He did not gesture. He let the stillness expand until it filled the room. The officer shifted his weight again, breath shallow, chest rising and falling in uneasy rhythm. At last, the man spoke. His voice was calm, measured. "You will wait for the board's decision." Nothing more. The officer gave a short nod, almost a flinch, and stepped back. The door closed quietly behind him, returning the office to silence. The man sat still. The badge remained on the desk, glinting under fluorescent light. Authority had shifted hands, but the system around it had not moved. The marble floors still gleamed. The benches still endured. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The institution remained intact, untouched, indifferent. Outside the office window, the courthouse rose in severe lines of stone and glass, a monument to permanence. People entered and left, passing through the archway, submitting to ritual. Shoes squeaked across the floor. Silence pressed down on every corridor. One officer had been checked. One man had endured, but the structure remained, and the silence of the system stood unbroken.